My mom left me with my evil stepdad and he kicked me out. 5 years later, they came to me for help, and I told them this. I was 10 when my world flipped upside down, not because I did anything wrong, but because life just has a way of throwing you curveballs. My dad had been the center of my world, the guy who'd lift me on his shoulders at football games and spend weekends teaching me how to fix just about anything. Then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, he was gone. Just like that. In a car accident that left me and my mom in a fog of disbelief and sorrow. The next couple of years felt like we were stuck in some kind of limbo. Mom was shattered, drifting through her days with a hollowed-out look that made our home feel more like a mausoleum than a place filled with memories of laughter and life. I missed her almost as much as I missed Dad, even though she was right there. Things started to change when I was 12. Mom met Mark at a teacher's conference. She was a math teacher, always passionate about her numbers and equations, and Mark was a counselor at a different school. He had a smile that seemed to bring Mom back to life, and for the first time in years, I saw a flicker of happiness in her eyes. They started dating, and it didn't take long before Mark was coming over for dinner most nights, filling our quiet house with his booming voice and endless sports stories. At first, I tried to like him. I really did. He tried too, awkwardly offering to throw a football around or take me to baseball games. But it always felt forced, like he was checking boxes on how to be a good stepdad. When they got married a year later, right after I turned 13, I remember standing at the back of the crowd, watching Mom laugh and dance, a lighter version of herself that I hadn't seen in years. It was enough to make me swallow any doubts. Maybe this was a good thing. Maybe we could be a family again. But as the weeks turned into months, the facade started to crack. Mark had a way of marking his territory, so to speak. His stuff began to replace the things Dad had left behind. His golf clubs in the closet where Dad's old fishing gear used to be, his modern art on the walls where Dad's photos of us used to hang. It wasn't just physical space he was taking over, it was everything. Our routines, our traditions, they all started to morph into what Mark wanted. He was subtle at first with his comments. A joke here about my still childish bedroom wallpaper. A comment there about how a real man would start pulling his weight around the house. I was 13, trying to navigate school, grief, and now this stranger critiquing every part of my existence. I remember one evening, I was finishing up a model airplane, something Dad and I had started together. Mark walked in, took one look at it, and laughed. "You're still playing with toys?" he scoffed. "Why don't you do something useful instead?" His words felt like a slap, dismissing not just what I was doing, but dismissing Dad, dismissing me. Mom saw it happen. I saw the flicker of pain in her eyes, but then she smoothed it over with a laugh. "Mark's just teasing," she said, pulling me into a side hug. "Why don't you show him that school project you were working on? I bet he'd love to see what you've accomplished." It was always like that. She was mediating, smoothing things over, asking me to be the bigger person. And I tried, really, I did. I changed the wallpaper, took on more chores, tried to talk about sports and cars, things Mark liked. But nothing changed the fact that I wasn't his, and he made sure I knew it. The worst part was feeling like I was losing Mom all over again. She was there, but she wasn't. She'd side with Mark, or she'd dismiss my feelings, telling me I was being too sensitive or that I needed to give him a chance. "When you're older, you'll understand," she'd say. "Mark wants what's best for us. He's trying in his own way." But his way felt like erasing who I was, erasing Dad from our lives. I spent more time in my room, more time at friends' houses, anywhere I could feel normal, anywhere I could breathe. When I turned 15, things got tougher. I got a part-time job at a local grocery store, thinking I could start saving for a car, maybe college. That's when Mark decided I should start paying rent. "It's time you learn about real life," he told me one night at dinner, a stern look on his face. "You want to act grown up? You can start by contributing like one." Mom hesitated. I saw it in her eyes, but then she nodded. "It might be good for you," she said. "Teach you some responsibility." So there went half my paycheck into Mark's hands every month. It wasn't just the money, it was the principle. It was the feeling of being pushed out, slowly but surely. The day Mom told me about her job opportunity in Europe, I felt a mix of pride and sheer panic. 6 months. 6 months with Mark, without her. She was so excited, so hopeful. I didn't want to burst her bubble, didn't want to be the reason her spark faded again. But living with Mark without her there as a buffer, I was terrified. I told her about some of the things he'd done, the comments, the way he'd make me feel small. "He's just strict," she said, brushing off my fears. You'll see, it'll be good for both of you. You'll find a way to get along. I knew better. I knew there was no getting along with someone who didn't want me there in the first place. But I nodded, kept my objections to myself, and helped her pack. When we drove her to the airport, I felt like I was watching my last lifeline disappear into the clouds. The ride back home was silent, heavy. Mark's hand on my shoulder wasn't comforting. It was a reminder of the weight about to press down on me. "Things are going to change," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. And I knew they would, just not in the way Mom hoped they would. With Mom gone, the house felt different, colder, emptier. Mark's presence loomed larger without her there to soften his sharp edges. I remember thinking that first night, staring at the ceiling in my room, that it was going to be a long 6 months. I wasn't wrong. Mark wasted no time establishing his new rules. The morning after Mom left, he laid them out at breakfast, a list he must have been preparing for weeks. Curfews were stricter, chores were doubled, and any minor slip-up was met with a disproportionate amount of criticism. The worst part? He decided that my time on the computer or phone would be limited, only an hour a day, because he believed technology was making me lazy. It wasn't just about control. It was as if he was trying to reshape me into someone else, someone more to his liking, quiet, submissive, invisible. Any attempt I made to argue or explain was quickly shut down with a harsh, "My house, my rules." One evening, I was finishing up my homework in the living room, math, my worst subject. Mark was watching a football game, yelling at the TV as his team fumbled yet again. I tried to focus on the equations in front of me, but the noise was too much. "Can you maybe turn it down a bit?" I asked, my voice hesitant. It was a simple request, one I hoped he'd understand given the stack of books around me. He turned to me, his face twisted in annoyance. "This is the only time I get to relax. You can go study in your room." "My lamp broke. I don't have enough light in there," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark scoffed, turning back to the game. "Sounds like a you problem. Be more careful next time." But it wasn't that I had been careless. He knew that. The lamp was one of the many things that had mysteriously stopped working or gone missing since he'd started ruling the house with his iron fist. It was his passive-aggressive way of telling me that even my space wasn't mine anymore. As the days turned into weeks, the house felt smaller, the air thicker. I spent more time out, staying late at school, hanging out at the library, anywhere but home. It wasn't a solution, but it was a temporary escape from the constant tension. Then came the incident with my bike. It was an old thing, a hand-me-down from my dad, but it was mine, and it was freedom. One Saturday, I planned to meet a couple of friends at the park. I went to the shed to get my bike, only to find it wasn't there. Panicked, I searched around before confronting Mark, who was in the garage, tinkering with his car. "Do you know where my bike is?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Oh, that old thing?" He didn't even bother looking up. "I gave it away. You're too old for that junk. It was taking up space." "You gave it away?" My voice cracked. "It was mine. You can't just give away my stuff." Mark finally looked at me, his expression cold and unyielding. "I can and I did. You need to grow up and stop clinging to your childish things. Besides, it's my garage. I decide what stays and what goes." I remember feeling so powerless, so small. That bike wasn't just a bike. It was one of the last pieces of my dad I had left. But arguing with Mark was futile. He'd made that clear. So I walked away, fists clenched, the loss of the bike feeling like another link to my dad severed. My friends were sympathetic when I told them what happened. They tried to cheer me up, but the damage was done. It wasn't just about the bike. It was about every little thing that Mark did to erase my presence, my past, my identity. School became my only solace, and even that was becoming difficult. My grades, once decent, began to slip. Teachers noticed, asked questions, but what could I tell them? That my stepdad was a tyrant? That I was miserable? I kept to myself, mumbled something about being tired, and promised to try harder. The situation at home reached a boiling point one evening over something trivial: dinner. Mark had decided to cook, something he rarely did, and he expected gratitude and praise for his efforts. The meal was fine, but I wasn't in the mood to play the part of the grateful son. I was quiet, ate without comment, and that set him off. "You ungrateful little brat," he hissed as he cleared the dishes. "I go out of my way to make a nice dinner and you can't even muster a thank you?" I looked up, surprised by his anger over such a small thing. "It was good," I said, trying to keep the peace. "Thank you." But it was too late. He was already ranting about respect, about how kids these days have no appreciation for what they're given. I'm not asking for much, just a little respect, he went on, his voice rising with every word. But you? You're just like your father, selfish, ungrateful. You think the world owes you something. The mention of my dad was a low blow, and it hit hard. Tears stung my eyes, but I fought them back. Don't talk about my dad, I managed to say, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Mark sneered. Why? Can't handle the truth? I'm going to my room, I said, standing up. I needed to get away, to breathe. Yeah, run away, that's what you're good at, he called after me as I walked away. That night, lying in the dark of my room, I realized that this wasn't going to get better. Not in a week, not in 6 months. Mark had made this home a battlefield, and I was always going to be the enemy. The weeks that followed were a relentless grind. Every day felt like a marathon, a test of endurance. Mark's mood swings were unpredictable. One moment he was eerily calm, and the next, he was a storm of anger over the smallest things. Living with him was like walking through a minefield. You never knew what would set him off. One of the new rules Mark instituted was a check-in system. I had to text him the moment school ended, the second I left work, and right when I was on my way home. If I missed a check-in, or if I was late by even a few minutes, there would be hell to pay. He said it was about safety, about being responsible, but I knew better. It was about control. My job at the grocery store became my escape, a few hours each day where I didn't have to think about home. My manager, Mr. Jensen, noticed the long hours I was putting in and started giving me more responsibilities. You're a hard worker, Tom, he'd say, clapping me on the back. Reliable. That's rare these days. The praise felt good, but also sad in a way, because I knew I was only working so much to avoid going home. One particularly rough day, I got held up at work. A late delivery threw everything off schedule, and I missed my check-in time with Mark by 15 minutes. I realized it as I was rushing out the door, my phone buzzing with missed calls and texts. Where are you? Are you ignoring me? Call me now! The messages escalated in anger, and a knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I called him, the phone shaking in my hand. Where the hell have you been? Mark's voice was a mix of fury and ice. I'm sorry, there was a delay at work. I couldn't... Excuses, he cut me off. You have responsibilities, Tom. You think the world stops because you're busy? You're supposed to be home an hour ago. I know, I'm sorry, it won't happen again, I stammered, the familiar feeling of dread settling in. It better not, he snapped, and hung up. The ride home was a blur of streetlights and shadows, my mind racing with what awaited me. When I got home, Mark was waiting in the living room, his expression stormy. Sit down, he ordered, pointing to the couch. We're going to have a talk about respect and responsibility. He grabbed a box of my things, old photos, my dad's watch, some school mementos, and threatened to throw them out. I pleaded with him to stop, and in the struggle, the box fell, and its contents scattered across the floor. As I scrambled to pick up my belongings, Mark towered over me. This ends now, he growled. I want you out of my house by tomorrow, or I'll throw you out myself. That was the last straw. I realized I couldn't take it anymore. Once Mark went to bed, I packed a bag with essentials and left in the middle of the night. I crashed at my best friend's place for a few days before finding a small room to rent with my savings from my part-time job. I didn't tell my mom immediately because I didn't want to worry her or jeopardize her job opportunity. I figured I'd explain everything when she got back. I blocked Mark's number because he kept sending me threatening messages, saying he'd call the police and report me as a runaway if I didn't come back. It's been a month now, and I'm managing on my own. It's not easy. I'm working extra hours to cover rent and basic necessities while trying to keep up with school. Some days I barely have enough to eat, but it's still better than living under Mark's roof. I feel guilty for leaving without telling my mom, but I also feel like I had no choice. The constant fear and stress were crushing me. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole for leaving my stepfather's house while my mom was abroad? Should I have tried harder to make things work? Should I reach out to my mom now and explain everything I'm lost and could really use some advice? Edit. Thank you all for your responses. I've read through them and appreciate the support. Many of you have asked about my living situation and future plans. I'm currently staying in a small studio apartment that I found through a friend of a friend. It's not ideal. The plumbing is temperamental and I can hear every move my neighbors make, but it's safe and affordable. I'm working part-time at a local diner and doing some online tutoring to make ends meet. As for school, I'm in my senior year and determined to graduate. I've been in touch with my school counselor about my situation, and they've been supportive in helping me stay on track. Some of you suggested reaching out to other family members. Unfortunately, my mom was an only child and my grandparents passed away a few years ago. My dad's side of the family lost touch with us after he died. It's pretty much just been me. my mom and Mark for the past few years. I'm still unsure about how to handle things when my mom returns. Part of me wants to tell her everything, but another part is scared she won't believe me or will side with Mark again. I guess I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. For now, I'm focused on staying afloat and finishing school. Thank you all again for your advice and kind words. Update 1. It's been 6 months since my original post and a lot has happened. I wanted to update you all on the situation. My mom returned from her work trip abroad last week. I was nervous about facing her, but I was also looking forward to finally explaining everything that had happened with Mark. However, things didn't go as I had hoped. The day after she got back, I received a call from her. Her voice was cold and angry, nothing like the warm, loving tone I was used to. She demanded to know if it was true that I had stolen money from Mark and run away. I was shocked and confused. My mind raced, trying to understand where this accusation was coming from. I tried to explain what really happened, how Mark had been verbally abusive, how he had threatened to kick me out, and how I left for my own safety and mental health. I told her about the incident with the box of my belongings, about how Mark had made my life miserable. Every day she was gone, but my mom wouldn't listen. She kept insisting that Mark had shown her evidence of my theft. When I asked what evidence, she was vague, saying something about missing cash and suspicious bank transactions. I told her it was all lies, that I had never stolen anything in my life. I reminded her of how I'd always been honest with her, how I'd worked hard at my part-time job to contribute to the household, but it seemed like her mind was already made up. I begged her to meet me in person so we could talk face to face. After some persuasion, she agreed, but when we met at a local cafe, Mark was with her. The moment I saw him, my heart sank. He had a sorrowful expression on his face, but I could see the triumphant glint in his eyes. Mark put on a show of being concerned and disappointed in me. He spun a tale about how he had tried his best to take care of me while my mom was away, but that I had become rebellious and started stealing money to fund a party lifestyle. He talked about how he'd noticed cash missing from his wallet, how he'd seen suspicious withdrawals from their joint account. I was floored. Every word out of his mouth was a lie, but he told it so convincingly. He even had fake receipts and bank statements that he claimed proved I had been taking money. I don't know how he fabricated them, but they looked real enough to fool my mom. He talked about how he'd tried to confront me about it, but I had run away instead of facing the consequences. I tried desperately to defend myself, to tell my side of the story. I explained how I'd been working extra shifts to support myself, how I'd been struggling to make ends meet in my small apartment. I told him about the nights I'd gone to bed hungry because I couldn't afford both food and rent. I pleaded with my mom to remember how I'd always been responsible with money, how I'd never given her any reason to doubt me before. But Mark had clearly been working on my mom for weeks before she returned. He had poisoned her against me, making her believe I was a troubled, ungrateful kid who had taken advantage of her absence. He painted himself as the victim, a concerned stepfather who had only wanted to help his wayward stepson. The worst part was seeing the look of disappointment and anger in my mom's eyes. She told me she couldn't believe I would do this to her, that she had trusted me to behave while she was gone. When I tried to explain about Mark's behavior, she accused me of trying to shift blame and making up lies about my caring stepfather. "How could you do this to us?" she asked, her voice breaking. "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us." Her words cut deep, each one feeling like a physical blow. I couldn't understand how she could believe Mark over me, her own son. The meeting ended with my mom telling me she needed time to think about what to do next. She said she couldn't have me back in the house if she couldn't trust me. As they left the cafe, I saw Mark put his arm around my mom's shoulders, comforting her. The sight made me feel sick. Over the next few days, I tried repeatedly to reach out to my mom to get her to listen to me without Mark's influence, but she either ignored my calls or replied with short, cold messages telling me to stop lying and take responsibility for my actions. I was desperate. I reached out to a few of my mom's friends, hoping they might be able to talk some sense into her, but it seemed Mark had gotten to them too. They all told me how disappointed they were in me, how they couldn't believe I would steal from my own family. Eventually, my mom sent me a long text message saying she had decided it was best if I didn't come back home. She said she was deeply disappointed in me and that she needed time to process everything. She told me not to contact her for a while. I was devastated. Not only had I lost my home, but I had also lost my mom, the one person I thought would always be on my side. Mark had managed to manipulate her completely, turning her against her own son. The next few weeks were a blur. I threw myself into work and school, trying to keep my mind off the gaping hole in my life where my family used to be. I had trouble sleeping often, lying awake at night, replaying the conversations in my head, wondering what I could have said differently to make my mom believe me. My grades started to slip again, and I was at risk of not graduate. It took a concerned teacher pulling me aside to snap me out of my funk. She noticed the changes in me and asked what was wrong. After some hesitation, I told her everything. To my surprise, she believed me. She helped me get in touch with a school counselor and a social worker who could provide me with resources and support. With their help, I was able to get back on track with my studies and even secure some additional financial aid to help with my living expenses. Now I'm trying to figure out my next steps. I'm still in my small apartment, working as much as I can to support myself. I've reached out to a few trusted teachers at school who have been supportive and are helping me navigate finishing high school as an independent student. I'm hurt, angry, and scared about the future. The betrayal by my mom stings deeply, and there are days when the loneliness feels overwhelming. But I'm also determined to prove Mark wrong and show my mom the truth someday. I don't know if our relationship will ever be the same, but I haven't given up hope entirely for now. I'm focusing on graduating high school and planning for college. It won't be easy, but I'm determined to build a better life for myself, with or without my family's support. Thank you all for your support on my original post. If anyone has advice on how to move forward from here, I'd really appreciate it. How do I heal from this betrayal? How do I build a life for myself when I feel so alone? Any words of wisdom would be welcome. Update 2. 5 years later, it's been 5 years since my last update, and my life has changed dramatically. I wanted to share what's happened and get some perspective on a recent development. After high school, I threw myself into my studies and work. The pain of losing my family was still raw, but I channeled that hurt into determination. I managed to get a scholarship to a state university majoring in computer science to make ends meet. I juggled multiple part-time jobs working at the university library, doing freelance web design, and even delivering pizzas on weekends. College was challenging, but also liberating. For the first time in years, I felt free from the constant fear and anxiety that had plagued me. Living with Mark. I made friends who became like family to me, and I even started seeing a therapist to work through the trauma of my past. I graduated with honors, landing a job at a promising tech startup right out of college. The work was demanding with long hours and high pressure, but I thrived on the challenge. It felt good to be valued for my skills and work ethic, something I hadn't experienced in a long time. Over the past 3 years, I've worked my way up in the company. I started as a junior developer, but my dedication and innovative ideas caught the attention of the higher-ups. I was promoted to team lead within a year, and recently, I was made lead developer for our main product. Our startup recently secured a huge investment catapulting us into the big leagues of the tech world. With this came a significant salary increase for me, along with stock options that could be worth a substantial amount if the company continues to grow. For the first time in my life, I'm not just financially stable, but comfortable. I bought my first car, moved into a nice apartment, and even started putting money aside for the future. Throughout this time, I had no contact with my mom or Mark. It was hard, especially during holidays and milestones like my college graduation and job promotions. There were nights when I'd lie awake wondering if my mom ever thought about me, if she ever regretted believing Mark over me. But I focused on building a new life for myself and creating a chosen family with close friends and mentors. Last week, out of the blue, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, there was a moment of silence, and then I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 5 years. It was my mom. Her voice sounded tired and desperate, nothing like the confident, loving mom I remembered from my childhood. She told me she and Mark were in financial trouble. Apparently, Mark had made some bad investments and they were facing foreclosure on their house. The company Mark worked for had gone bankrupt, leaving him unemployed for the past year. They had burned through their savings and were now drowning in debt. My mom apologized for everything that had happened years ago. Her voice cracked as she admitted that she had realized over time that Mark had been manipulating her. She said she regretted not believing me, and that the guilt had been eating at her for years. She asked if we could meet to talk things over to try and mend our relationship. I was stunned. For years, I had imagined this moment, my mom realizing the truth, reaching out to reconnect. But now that it was happening, I felt a whirlwind of emotions, hope, anger, sadness, and a lingering sense of betrayal. After a long pause, I agreed to meet her at a cafe, the same one where we had our confrontation 5 years ago. When I arrived, I was surprised to see both my mom and Mark there. My mom looked older and worn down her hair grade, and her face lined with worry. Mark seemed to have lost the arrogant air he once had, his shoulders slumped and his eyes downcast. They explained their situation in more detail. They were months behind on their mortgage payments, and the bank was threatening to take their house. Mark had lost his job when his company folded, and despite trying, he hadn't been able to find steady work since. My mom's salary as a teacher wasn't enough to cover their debts and living expenses. As they talked, I noticed the dynamic between them had changed. My mom seemed more assertive, often cutting Mark off or correcting him. Mark, on the other hand, appeared subdued, a far cry from the domineering man I remembered. Then came the real reason for their reaching out. They asked if I could lend them money to help them get back on their feet. They had heard through mutual acquaintances about my success in the tech industry and thought I might be in a position to help. I sat there listening to their plea, feeling a mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated. They were finally admitting that Mark had lied and manipulated the situation years ago. But another part of me was angry that they only reached out when they needed something from me. My mom reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. "I know we don't deserve your help," she said, tears in her eyes. "What we did to you was unforgivable." "But we're desperate. We have nowhere else to turn," Mark chimed in, his voice lacking the confidence it once had. "I know you have every reason to hate me," he said. "I treated you terribly. I let my jealousy and insecurity poison everything. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I am truly sorry for what I did." Their apologies stirred up old memories and pain. I thought about the lonely nights in my tiny apartment, struggling to make ends meet. I remembered the feeling of betrayal when my own mother chose to believe a lie over her son's truth. After they finished talking, I took a deep breath and told them I needed time to think about it. I left the cafe without making any promises, their pleading eyes following me as I walked away. Now I'm torn. On one hand, I've worked hard for my success, and I don't feel I owe them anything after how they treated me. Mark's lies cost me my relationship with my mom and forced me to fend for myself at a young age. Part of me wants to refuse and let them face the consequences of their actions. On the other hand, despite everything, I still care about my mom. The thought of her being homeless or struggling tugs at my heart. But I'm worried that if I help them, I'll be opening myself up to further manipulation or expectations of ongoing support. I'm also concerned about the impact this could have on my own financial stability. While I'm doing well now, I'm not sure if I can afford to bail them out without compromising my own future. The startup world is volatile, and there's no guarantee my current success will last. There's also the question of forgiveness. Can I truly move past what happened? Is it possible to rebuild a relationship with my mom after such a profound betrayal? And what about Mark? While he apologized, can I ever trust him or have him in my life again? I've spent the last week mulling over these questions, unable to come to a decision. I've talked it over with my closest friends, and even brought it up in a session with my therapist. Everyone has different opinions, but ultimately they all say the same thing. It's my decision to make. Part of me is tempted to help to be the bigger person and extend an olive branch. Maybe this could be the first step in healing old wounds and rebuilding my relationship with my mom. But another part of me is scared of being hurt again, of opening myself up to the pain I've worked so hard to overcome. So Reddit, I find myself asking once again, am I the a-hole if I refuse to help my mom and stepdad financially after everything that's happened? Should I give them another chance or protect myself and the life I've built? I'm at a crossroads, and I could really use some outside perspective.